Друзья, всем привет! С вами я, София Скай, и наша программа Actors Talk. Today we're gonna speak English because my guest is my friend from Spain. I'm waiting for Jordi Farres to show up and to tell us about how is his career how did he came to acting, and what is his his past is about. So I can see that Jordi is already here. I'm gonna pass him to talk about himself, because here he is. Spanish names are very difficult for me to pronounce. And
hello.
Here you are. Oh wow! Look how handsome you are.
You're always
Thank
good.
you so much for finding time and to share with us your mood and your story.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Tell us about your project at first, because when I read them, I realized that it's going to be impossible for me to pronounce them because it's Spanish. And I also know that you know like 4 languages, and we're going to talk about that later. So languages is not that difficult for you as it is for me. So tell us about your projects. Where could we see you before?
Lately I've been shooting many short films here. I just received yesterday the first cut of one I shot with actually Victor Sole. He was in the course with us, titled Redención, which is looked really good, the first cut that they showed us, and we're looking forward to being able to move it around some festivals soon. And then I just released one during the pandemic called Solo Cuando Rías. It's about a little girl it's a true story about a girl who was born in an ICU, and because she saw everybody with masks on all the time, she was unable to smile because she had never seen nobody smile. So until like her parents actually like pulled down the mask and smiled to her, she started laughing, and everybody was really concerned because she wasn't laughing at the beginning. And that one was really, really nice, and you can find it on YouTube now, I think.
Very interesting. Is it a feature film? Like, it's a short film.
It's a short film. It's like a 20-minute short film, but it's really, really nice. And we shot it right before the whole pandemic and everything. So when you saw it now, when it opened, it was like, this is very like on spot of the subject, and we were not thinking about this when we shot it. Yeah.
But how come? Like, who wrote it? It's
supposed to be. It was a true story. Some nurse told them the story, and they decided to show a short film about it. And then just magical things that happened with this business. And when it came out, it was like the best moment to come out during the pandemic.
I'm
especially
absolutely gonna watch that.
I'll send you a link. Yeah, it's really, really nice.
So, Jordi, can you tell us, I usually ask my guests about the very, very beginning of the career. And I know that before you started your acting career and before you even started to be interested in that, you were a biologist.
I was a biologist.
How did it happen that you became an actor? Do you remember that exact moment, Because I'm sure that lots of people who are watching us once in a life thought about that career, but then they were like, I
think we all actors know the exact moment we discovered acting as a profession, and we thought about becoming actors. For me, it was a very young age. Like the moment I remember when I was 5 or 6, my school always put like a play while we were in school, and they always put me as the lead. And I remember that semester that we did the school play every year was the most happy semester of the year for me.
More specific about the very, very first time you came on stage and you realized that I feel good.
I remember like it was always like when the day of the performance came in front of the parents. For me, it was the most magical moment, like just being there and having the whole power of everybody watching you, and you have the time and you have that power when you're on stage to control that energy. And from that moment, I was like, this is something I really like, but I didn't think of it as a profession. But I always knew acting would be part of my life. It was just as a matter of, initially you think, okay, let's study something like just in case acting doesn't work. And then I've always loved science, so I went into biology and got a PhD and everything. But the acting was always there. And then there was a point I was like, I started studying it more and more and more during my 20s, and then there was a point at my 30s I was like, no, I want this to be my profession. I don't want to do it as a hobby. So yeah.
Was it a studio where you studied, or was it a, you know, like a full university for 4 years? And did you go to theater after you started in your older age to become
So
an actor?
I did a lot of theater before, like amateur theater, we call it here, before going into formal training. And then I did do formal training, but it was like an evening school. So I did university in the morning and theater training for 3 years in the evening. So I was like full-time studying. And then from there, I just kept on training whenever I had the opportunity. I went to New York for a summer in Atlantic Acting School, the school that David Mamet founded, and that was, I think that was a big switch for me. Being in New York, where studying acting was always a dream of mine, and the way they addressed that, and there one of the big questions a teacher made that day, that she was like, many people like studying acting just for acting, but one thing is study acting and the other thing is working as an actor. And that's when I did the switch, like, okay, I'm liking this part, but I really have to like try and work out the other one. How is it? How does living as an actor mean, and what the implication are, moreover than just going to class and learning the text and doing the exercises.
Like the
and
full
that for me
intensive.
Yeah.
And can you tell us a little bit more specific about the program and the difference that you know, for example, you've described something in Europe and Barcelona where you live. And when you came to New York, what was totally different or new? Like,
there's one thing that, like, here in Barcelona, everything's very informal and it's very relaxed, which I like. And the moment I got to New York, they were no bullshit. Like the class says it starts at 9, and like the class starts at 9. And I remember they were like, no, you have 15 minutes before to come into class, and at 9, I want the scene that we're gonna see has to be ready, set, and prepared to start on the go at 9. While here at 9, everybody's still with their coffee, talking outside. Oh, let's go. Who wants to go first? To blah, blah, blah. So it takes like 20 minutes until somebody actually puts something on. I had to warm up. So I think that level of professionalism, I loved it. Stressed me out at the beginning, but turned out like an amazing experience. Also, because we did a lot of, in that technique-wise, it was the first time I did Meisner, which I was Meisner or based on, which I had never done and I loved. And we did a lot of text analysis, which I had never done. Also, I always was an actor. I came from musical theater and more body training, so le coq. So I was more used to like people telling me what they wanted me to do, but not having my own opinion of, I think this text implies that we should try. He's thinking this, and so that technique, that school opened me a whole world of like text analysis and actually putting your own perspective as an artist, like, oh, this is really interesting, and I think he's feeling this, so I want to try this, and having your point of view, which I think as an artist is one of the most important things. It is
very interesting you brought it up, because I know that in theater mostly there is a director who really directs you, and I have lots of questions about like, oh, if that actor wasn't so good in the movie, everyone is saying like, oh, probably the director wasn't so good. So, and that's exactly the truth, that in the United States, what we bring into the movie, it's the actor's job. So director is choosing in the very beginning the type of the person he wants to see, but he never directs the actual action in the movie. And so that's a very interesting thing. You just brought it up, you know?
I think it's interesting to learn to have what I say, like your own point of view, especially like when you think about the actors that you admire, that you like, they all have a strong point of view. Like, and you always have to be open to direction, and there's a director, so it's not like you're going to do your work on your own. But it's interesting to have like something to start on and then build on with the director and with the whole crew, the whole story, not do it on your own. But I do think it's interesting to have a strong opinion and then be able to hold it whenever you feel like, no, I feel this is really important and I really want to play it like this, because I think he's coming from this place, and having that opinion and basing that through the text only. I really liked how they made us really analyze it just by what the text was saying. Like, creative you need to, but like go into why is he saying this? Why is he not saying this? So if he's not saying this, that might mean something. So analyzing through that was very, very, very interesting.
Yeah, so every single moment has a meaning on its own.
Yeah.
It's our favorite saying.
Exactly.
Yes. So, well, do you remember the reaction? You know, for example, you went to New York and then you came back from that study and you started to use those techniques you studied in New York. So, what was the reaction of Spanish surroundings?
I think at the beginning, what I had to readjust what I was saying, that New York is very like on time professional, and here everybody was like, relax, like let's take it easy, let's finish our coffee and let's go into rehearsal at another pace. I think for me that was the strongest, but the rest of like having your own point of view and stuff, it just elevated my performance. I think I didn't experience any backlash in that sense. I think it all
it's like
added
you
up.
ask your partner to rehearse with you, and then you go like you're starting to break down the scene, and she's like, what are you doing? Let's just act, you know? And you're like, what do you mean just act?
let's talk about it before and then let's jump into it. Yeah, especially because I used to be one of those actors who just wanted to go straight into it. And many times you didn't really know what you were doing, so you were kind of like saving the situation just by your experience. But there was nothing. It's nice to take a moment and say, okay, let's sit down. I remember when we did a scene with you, we were like, okay, let's sit down, let's analyze it, let's see the moments, and then when this is set, let's start working and let's start doing. Because I do think some actors sometimes really like the analysis process, that there's a moment it's like, okay, the analysis is over, like whatever we could get out of this, we have gotten out of this, now we have to like put it on, because a good analysis is nothing if then it's not acted after.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm one of those actors that I prefer to know exactly where my action came from and what made me feel this way and how do I feel about this person and why do I feel this way and blah blah. So that makes it alive, and that makes every single reaction and communication really be there. Can you remember your most memorable experience on set? And also your first audition for a big project. How did it go? How did you feel? How did you prepare yourself?
Like my first audition, I thought about this lately. Like, do you remember? I don't really remember my first audition anymore. Like I had done auditions randomly at the beginning, but when I decided, like, okay, no, I really want to do this as an actor, so I started going to auditions. I started doing commercials, which you have like 5-6 auditions a week or sometimes even a day. So the first one I did, I remember the first one that I was very nervous. I didn't know anybody. Now like many casting directors know me, so it's much more relaxed. But the exact first one, I don't remember. An experience on set. Oh, I have many. I could talk for hours about this.
Yes, let's talk about it.
I remember
the most interesting.
Yeah, I remember one. It was really cool. We were they built a whole set. It was for an American commercial. They built a whole set of like an apartment, and they filled it in with water and water falling down. And like we had to go in with like the boots and everything in, and they put like the mark that they put you where to stand on, because everything was water. They put like a little ducky that was floating, but obviously it was floating around all the time. So like we had to like readjust it every take. Like I think it was here. So yeah, and that was very, very fun. It was very weird just being in the whole set. But
how about the relationships? Did you ever had a moment with your partner where you couldn't, you guys couldn't get in touch really? Like, for example,
I've had like I don't want to go too much into detail in that one, just because I don't want, like, it's not like that person or something. But there's always a moment like when you feel like the connection is not there, and I mean at the end you have to like kind of work into it and see how you get it.
So the point why I'm asking that is, for us to understand how you keep yourself up in those moments. For example, you're full of your preparation, and somebody is not really with you in that moment, and you really thought that it's going to be all good, but it goes a different direction. How do you bring yourself up? How
for me, I try to be really present and not think about it that much. Like if I'm lacking that connection, because I can get into my head a lot and then start making like a whole issue about it. So I try not to do that. So I try to okay, let's see what we're working on with like this, like the connection. Maybe I was trying to get rid of my expectation of what I think the scene had to go on, and the connection I wanted is like, okay, but that's not here. Like, let's work with what is here, even if it's not the connection I wish, that, because it's always nice when with your acting partner there's like instant chemistry, but it's not always that. And that's part of the actor's job, to find the chemistry even when it's not there. So when it's not there, it's like, okay, I try to like get rid of my expectation and just focus on what is there, and try to make the scene work as better as you can, and that just gives you, I think, experience. Just working on that, and then whenever I say cut and the scene's over, just like, okay, nice to work with you, and see you later. Like it's always nice when there's a good chemistry on and off camera, but it doesn't really always happen. So whenever it doesn't, just try your best. Try to connect with whatever the other person's giving you. Try to be humble with not trying to impose your point of view, because I think that will go against you more than in favor. Just really try to work with what is there, and
imagine the chemistry is there. Imagine.
Exactly. Just imagine the chemistry is there. But sometimes it's like, oh no, but you're acting with like you're somebody that's your girlfriend, and it's like, oh, but you were thinking something more passionate and it's really cold. But there are relationships that they are really cold, so it's not a problem. So it's like, it's just another relationship, not the one that you thought about, but it can still work. Just work with what you have.
So what is the exercise, for example, if you have a love scene, and your girlfriend is there watching, how do you prep yourself to forget about that she's right there and like staring at you and going like, are you going to put your tongue out or not? Like,
yeah, that's
like, is there a technique you can share?
Ooh, I'd say if that happens, that specifically has never happened to me, like with my girlfriend looking at the scene. I'd say have a conversation with your girlfriend, like, this is my job, just like you need to separate this, because like we can't, like, this is not gonna work if you're gonna, and if this bothers you, then just leave set, because like when I'm on set, I don't like friends or family and stuff be with me in set normally, unless I've been shooting for many days and then I'm more relaxed. But the first days and days that are like more important scenes, more dramatic scenes, or more like romantic scenes, I prefer like to not have that external influence, so that to be able to like forget who I am and who people think I am, and just be in the moment with the person that I am working with.
Basically, it is a full preparation where you're answering all the questions.
I try to, yeah, it's just like remove yourself from everything that can distract you, because I get easily distracted, and just be there and work with what there is. Yeah.
So do you ever control people around you on set? For example, you're sitting in your green wagon, and there's people who are doing your makeup, and they start to talk about their own experience yesterday, like she met her friend and she's like, ha ha ha, and they were giggling,
blah, blah, blah,
and like, do you ever mark your space?
If I depends on. For me, what I really try to do in those cases is I really like having like the handout of like when am I going to shoot? Like if they're doing my makeup but my scene I'm not shooting until 2 hours, I can be like more relaxed with like, okay, let's talk about like let's stress, because I'm not on set like they're not gonna say action until 2 hours, so I can relax. If I know it's coming closer, then for me that's just a moment of start zoning out and start like. Unless they're really talking towards me, that then I might just be colder and not say much, because I'm trying to concentrate. And if they're not talking to me, just like, or I put my headphones. Sometimes I just put my headphones on and be like, I'm out, sorry. And normally people like everybody that's been on set for a while understands like whenever the actor is about to go on set, about to do a scene, and they just put their headphones on, they're like, okay, he's in preparation. So normally people are really kind. I've never found like myself to have to say like, can you leave me alone, and like have to like shove somebody away, because
so that's a good thing. And it's something, I think it's something specifically in Spain or Europe. Let's talk a little bit about the whole community of movies in Barcelona, in Spain. How does it go? Like, for example, you're studying at the university, then you get your classes to know the film, the way you guys film. It's
Yeah.
something you add to your theatrical studies. And then how do you get into actual work physically?
That's a very good question. And what I feel like as an actor, you always keep training in, like at the beginning, because there's always new places and new people you want to work with and new contacts you want to do. So it's not like one thing that magically opens the whole door to the whole industry. It's just like little steps. For me at the beginning was when I decided, okay, this is what I'm going to do. So try to find all the auditions I could whenever they were, like, oh, this guy's paying me whatever sure, I would go to whatever. Then I finally got an agent. So then through the agent, okay, then we started filtrating, like, maybe this is not the best project.
So how do you get the agent? That's the main thing. Like,
how you get the agent? Yeah. Do you get an agent? It's you look around all the agencies, acting agencies. I googled like acting agencies in Barcelona, and then you find a full list. I think it's some people rush finding an agent. I think it's something you have to take it slow. It's gonna be a long relationship, and it has to be nice. And it's like whenever you're looking for a job, like you need some time to like update your CV, get your proper headshots and everything. And for acting, the same. Update your CV, find proper headshots, research the agencies, see the actors that are. If you know people, contact them. Do they like it? Do they not? Do they have a good relationship with them? With not, contact the agent. Try having an interview. See the feelings. Feel if you're comfortable, and then from there you start moving on. And I feel, it's a strong relationship, so I recommend people to take it slow. Don't want to rush it. I've rushed many things in my life, and sometimes I've been glad when I've taken it a bit slower.
Thank you very much for this, and this is a very great note, because lots of people are going like, I must have an agent, and then the first one is going to take
exactly. Sometimes it's like you do need an agent. Like I remember having conversation at the beginning of my career with people like, I don't know if I need an agent. Barcelona is a small market. Like I know people who work without an agent, majorly like theater and some TV gigs, like they'll contact the actor directly because the fees are very low, so they won't go through an agent. So depending on the market, you can move without an agent. But I do strongly believe that you do need an agent, especially if you want to move up and have more work. The agent is a must. Just do take it slow to get one. I think that's important.
And then as soon as you have an agent, then it goes out of your agent.
But I think that's another misconception. Like once you get an agent, the agent will do a lot of work for you, but you do still have to do a lot of work. Somewhere I read the other day, I like this quote, like agent, you get 90% of your fee, an agent gets 10%. Like that's because you put 90% of the work and your agent puts 10. Like agents are a must, and I love my agent, but you do need to put work even if you have an agent. Like it's because if not, they'd be charging 50% for the amount of work. Like the agent will get you into the room and stuff, but you still need to contact and establish relationships and be ready whenever you are. So you still have to do work even though you have an agent. It's not like, oh, I have an agent, I can relax. No.
Right. So, for languages, does it help you with your career as an actor? Have you ever been cast as a French person? You speak French, you speak English.
I did once. I got a commercial in French with French text, and it was a lot of fun, a lot of pressure, because I'm like, oh, I do speak French, but like casually with friends and stuff, but I had never acted in French. So the first experience in French was weird. Here, because I speak Spanish and Catalan, and we have a bilingual industry, like it just opens you to way more projects if you can speak both languages than if you don't. And English, also. Like you get more international ones.
When you speak different languages, do you need to have your resume, your self-tape, your demo in different languages, or or it's enough to just say in your resume that you speak
I think your resume, you have to put it in your different languages, but again, depends on who you're contacting. Like I do not have an agent in France, but if I had, I obviously write like my resume in French. I wouldn't send them the one in Spanish or in English. I'd specifically write it in French. Or like right now I'm looking for an agent in the UK, and then I would send them not the CV I have in Spanish. I'd send them the one in English. Your show reel, if you're lucky enough to have work in all of those languages, obviously. But no, it's like if I'm gonna look for an agent in France, it's the case. Like I don't have material in French enough to like my good material is in Spanish and Catalan. So it's like, I
So
would
what?
show them that subtitled rather
Mm-hmm.
than shooting a short scene in French. And then I
Uh-huh.
might do what like we did with Lucy, like a little interview in French so that they see my
Mm-hmm.
level of spoken French, and then they see myself acting in another language, and then they can try and work it out with that.
Right. So if you don't have any experience in movies, but you need to actually, you need to have your demo to
Yeah.
in order to find an agent, basically.
Yeah.
Do you shoot that specifically? How do you get the material? It's like you, yeah.
That's one of the things everybody struggles more at the beginning, and I know I struggled a lot, like, because it's like, oh, I want to be an actor, but you need material, but so it's like, but I can't work without material. I need material to work, so it's like a never-ending spiral. You just have to break it and do your best and start doing like smaller things that they will cast you without. Nobody will give you like a lead star in a Marvel movie without material, obviously. So you have to like start working with like student films and blah blah blah,
Mm-hmm.
and little by little get a proper reel. You can hear in Spain, I know, I'm sure other countries, there are some companies that you can pay them as an actor and they'll shoot you a really nice reel. It's money, but like it's a decent investment. If you have the money, it's a decent investment to do. And if not, just go doing short films, and little by little, you'll get, even if you shoot your whole reel in a week, the more experience you have throughout time and doing short films, you'll get better. So eventually you'll say like, oh yes, I got this one, but like my acting is not that good as a year after, because I've been on set many more times. The first time you're on set, you're so nervous. For me, it's not your best performance. You have to like get into the habit of being on set. So the
Right.
more material you have, your real, as my agent says, is always, it's something to keep alive. It's not something like you do once and then you forget about it. Like every time I'm waiting for my this new short film whenever it's available to put it in. There's a really nice scene, so we'll put it in my reel. So I will update it. So it's something you update constantly. It's not like you make it once and here it is. Like you have to
Mm-hmm.
keep updating whatever the work, and with the work you have, you get new work, and then that you go into your reel, and it's a cycle.
Yeah. So the most important is to act in something and then
The
use
most
it.
important is it's like climbing a mountain. It's like you have to take the first step. So if you have
Mm-hmm.
nothing, shoot yourself a little monologue in your house, and then see if somebody hires you with that. And if not, like, and then you have to start. We all start somewhere, so we just start.
So tell me, are you happy with the amount of work and amount of auditions you're getting there in Spain? And my next question to this would be, have you ever thought of getting an agent and start to work in France, in London, in United States? Because especially now when the pandemic situation happened, all the self-tapes are so possible to send, and the world of acting became smaller than it
Yep.
was.
I think, for me, during the pandemic, it's been hard because obviously the amount of auditions went down, especially like in the months in like last year, March and April, there was absolutely no work, and like everything that I had like on maybe everything fell down.
Mm-hmm.
But it's been leading, and this last month, this February, was really, really nice with auditions. I started getting like a decent amount of auditions, which was like nice to have, like, oh, finally, like some work coming in and possibilities. It's always nice to audition. If I consider work is picking up here, if I consider getting agents outside, yeah, definitely. Like personally, utopically, I would rather have one agent to control the whole market, just because I feel it's more comfortable than having many in every country. But I haven't found one agent for all the countries, so definitely I would get.
Does it actually exist? One agent
It
for all the
doesn't.
countries?
I think there's some agents that I know work, big agents work like maybe USA and UK all together, can work those markets. Like if the market is really big, you can, like, for
Sorry
example,
about that.
whoa, you flipped. I know, like, for example, here in Spain, like there's two markets, one in Barcelona,
Sorry.
one in Madrid, but many agents control both markets at the same time. So I always prefer, like, the more work the actor can, the more work the agent can manage. I think it's just more comfortable because you don't have to stress like, oh, this, because with conflict in your agenda. I would like to get like an agent in France utopically, and one in the UK right now. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we talked with Lucy Lennox about this when we were studying together there, and I think she told us that there is a agent in each, like for example, you do commercial, there is a commercial agent. You do a movies, there is a movie agent. You do a theater, there is a theatrical agent.
Yep.
And even in one country, there is more than one. So I guess if you do full thing in 4 countries, there's going to be like 12
You're gonna
agents.
be a lot of agents. Yeah, I think then you have to hire one that like be like a manager or something to centralize some
Your
conversation.
manager to deal with all the agents.
To deal with all the agents. But yeah, like obviously, like the more countries you want to work on, like the more agents you will have, and then it's just a matter of moving around with them.
Have you ever had a situation where you got invited by someone and you know, some other, for example, agent, and then you're like, you know, I'm sorry, I cannot do this because I'm working with this person?
As in,
or you just
like I
paid 20%, 10.
no, like I've had situations where I had a situation at the beginning where, because like when I started, I had several, you could be here in Barcelona, you could be in several agencies if you were just doing commercials, and I started just with commercials, so I was in several agencies. And eventually what was happening was that the 3 agents were sending me the same auditions all the time. So I would have the same audition through 3 different agents. So at the end I was like, oh, I always went to the one that sent the audition first. So there was a point I was like, this is not working, because like I'm just getting the same amount of work by 3. So that's why I said like, okay, I'll pick one agency and then I'll stick with you and you guys send me all the work, because it was just like too much. Like it didn't make sense, like getting the same auditions. At the end, agents get a contact to almost in that market to almost the same audition. So it doesn't make much sense. So I just decided to have one. It never got like uncomfortable. It was really obvious, and then one of the agents suggested to me to be just with them, and I said, yeah, please, let's go.
Yeah, I had a few situations where, you know, I was looking for an agent, and then I was, you know, trying to get one like desperately. I was like, you know, take me. It's in the very beginning of your career, guys. Do never do that. You're the one who is choosing somebody who represents you, not the other.
Not the other way around. It's interesting. It's I like how you say it, because I felt at the beginning, I was like, oh, thank you for having me, and they were like, this is not working. Like I really like it's a really important relationship.
So in my story, I was almost like the only actress who was a ballerina at the same time in LA, and Russian actress and ballerina. So I was represented by DDO agency at first, and then when I was, you know, looking for an agent, I've met maybe like 5 different, and I was waiting for the result, and then I got this invite straight from the producer to get, you know, to audition for this part in a big pilot. Where I had to play, you know, role of Tatiana, who's a dancer from Russia. And then all 5 agencies called me.
Oh, wow.
Those who were like, oh, you know, we're not sure, not so much experience. No. And I got into the project. I was shot in the project, and that pilot was picked up. So all of them were fighting, you know, to have me there, because to be in a, you know, in a series of, I think it was HBO. It's in my resume. So they were like, "Yeah, we need her. We need, like, she's exactly."
But it's what I think always Lucy talked about this. Like whatever agent you have, they want you to work. So like if you can prove that you're working, any agency will normally like, unless you're like conflicting. So it's I like what you said. Like at the beginning, nobody wanted it, and then suddenly all like, okay, man.
Yeah, so
I've had similar feelings. Yeah.
Right. You can never be very desperate about this, and also can never take it personal.
Oh, no. Yeah. You have to take one of the things I'm working on. You have to learn about this business is don't take anything personal. Everybody's it's the work. It's like you are the work. Like I always say, like it's like you're selling shoes, but the shoe you're selling is yourself. So it's difficult sometimes not to take it personally, but you can't take it personally, because if not, like your mental health will go somewhere very bad.
Yeah, so it is also not very easy in the very beginning to represent yourself without being shy about saying how great you are. You know, I'm the best. Take me.
Yeah, I'm the. Please hire me.
Nobody wanted me. I'm so poor. I'm like.
For me, I feel what you say. It happens when you're like in this business. I'm sure you've experienced it. You have highs and lows. You have seasons that you work a lot and seasons that you don't work a lot. And the seasons that you're not working a lot, it's kind of like your instinct, like, please hire me. Like I need work, and it's really you have to work on not showing that desperate, because it's like it's the
Just like
worst.
I'm not that good anymore. You don't love me.
Yeah, no,
You
yeah,
love me
nobody loves me.
yesterday.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, so it is, acting job is a very
That's what I was saying at the beginning. Like for me, one of the things you have to learn as an actor once you've finished your acting training is how to work as an actor. And how to work as an actor is dealing with your agent, dealing with different markets, dealing with rejection. All of this is away from your acting training, and it should be away. But it's something that you have to learn if you want to survive as a working actor, is how to deal with all these things.
That's so right and so true. And thank you for mentioning that again, because lots of actors thinking I'm talented, that's enough.
Hmm?
Like they should find me, they should use
Yeah,
me,
yeah, yeah.
they should give me. It never happens. You're
For
the
me,
one.
it was always one. This is one of those moments that you remember. After being in New York, one of the teachers posted on Facebook to people like, "Okay, everybody that studied in the school and is not a working actor right now, I'd like to know why." And one of the comments I read, it was a girl. She was like, "Oh, because as much as I loved training as an actor, the moment I started working as an actor, I saw it was not for me." And that's one of the moments I said, I've been loving training as an actor for many years, but I have to see if I love the profession or not. And I love the profession, but it's something like you have to do. And if it doesn't work for you, it doesn't work for you. But it is a different skill set that you have to work on. And yeah,
Absolutely.
definitely.
How did you become a producer? And I also know that you are writing scripts and you're directing, correct me if I'm wrong.
Not that much. I tried to produce at the beginning of my career a few things, but it's really it's a lot of work to produce things. I've never written anything, but like to produce and direct it, it's a lot of work. And there was a moment. This was a very initial in my career, and there was a moment I was like, I want to put my strength in acting because this is what I want to work on. And when I feel like I have acting totally controlled on set and blah blah, then maybe I'll get into directing or maybe I'll get into producing. But right now, being on set and also having to think to be the producer, it's just like too much work for me, and I feel it takes me away from the acting. And at the end, what I would like it to stand out is the acting. So I'd rather just stay in the acting side, and whenever I'm more prepared or have more skill or have more context, I might jump into that, but not at the moment.
Tell us about your favorite part that you played. And what was it, and how did you find your character in that your favorite part? Which one you really enjoyed to rewatch? If you see it on TV, you would be proud of.
Interesting. I always like to. I heard an actor say the other day, and I love this quote. I always like to feel like my best part is still in front of me, not behind me. So it's like I want to believe like my favorite part hasn't come yet. Some that I have enjoyed, I really enjoyed. I played for a couple of years touring around Spain, in The Wizard of Oz, the part of the lion. I had a blast with that because they allowed me to be like a really crazy, scared to death lion. I was shouting all the time, running around stage all the time, running around. It was a lot of fun. I got a lot of laughs, and whenever you're doing comedy and you feel like the audience laughing, that one is one that especially because it's one of the characters I've played the longest in a theater production. Normally I've been in production smaller or that have just run for a month and nothing, and that one we spent 2 years doing it. So that one I after 2 years, like you have it under your belt, so I enjoyed it a lot. That one I would say, yeah.
And about and movies.
And in movies, I'd say the last one I did, the one I was telling you with Victor, we did with Victor Sole, I really enjoyed it because I'm more used to doing like more comedies or more like funny, casual, like nice guy. And then that one it was a thriller, and I was tied up and they were beating me and they were trying to get information out of me. And because it was something out of my comfort zone, that was really fun to do. And I really, really liked it. Yeah.
So for you, comedy is easier than the rest.
For me, yeah.
That's all.
Yeah. I don't know if it's easy. I just understand the timings and I like it. And I think comedy is all about timing. Like if you don't have the timing, it doesn't work. If you have the timing, and I feel I understand. I mean, sometimes I'm not funny, but I feel I understand the timing. And if you are with an actor that understands the timing, that relationship is really, really nice. And I have a lot of fun with it. Yeah.
So does it have to deal with your personal life? Are you a fun person, or you're, you know, very deep person, and that's why you're avoiding, you know, those
Ooh,
parts?
I think probably I'd say I've used many times in my life comedy to like deflect uncomfortable situations. I'm that kind of person. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm an expert on like with friends, like if something comes personal, I'll just like getting a joke out of that. So I think that's helped me like then that comedy is easy for me just because I've been deflecting all my life through comedy. So that
But
feels
do you
comfortable.
have
Yeah.
anything to use if you get a dramatic part, like if there is a part of somebody who just, like, I had an interview recently with Elizabeth, my
Okay.
friend from Los Angeles, and she was playing a girl who was driving a car, being drunk,
Hmm.
and she hit a pregnant woman. I think that. And she
Wow.
doesn't have kids. And she's like, and we were talking about that and how deep she went and what she used, you know, to get this, you know, so something inside of
Yeah.
herself. What would you use, or like, is there something to use in your
Like
thought?
for me, I do struggle in those situations because I really like doing drama. I think it takes me some places nice, and it's funny for me because I feel it like in any industry, like there's the people who know me for comedy always hire me for comedy, and the people who know me for drama always hire me for drama. So it's like you always try to work like that they interconnect. Uh, the dramas I've done, I did one that was pretty heavy about the father who had lost her daughter in the ocean, and I struggle more in that sense of trying to take it into a deeper level and not making it funny and trying to make it personal, trying to make yourself vulnerable for that situation and letting it affect you. Uh, you have to go like it's just a matter of concentration and allowing
So
yourself to go to that
imagination mostly, right?
imagination and allowing yourself to be there and letting that. For me, I always the way it works for me, like I know a lot of people go back to like a lot of old memories they have from childhood and work through that. For me, it doesn't work that much as just empathy and like feeling if I was
Mm-hmm.
in this situation, how would this affect me?
Yeah,
Like
what if?
the one I
Mm-hmm.
was doing, it was really nice, and it was a father who had lost her kid in the ocean, and they were in a toxic relationship with his wife.
Mm-hmm.
It just I for me the way I got in was like imagine this happened to you, and that took me directly there. Like it I didn't need to use anything of my past baggage. That directly
Right.
took me to the
Right.
place. Yeah.
Right. Now, Jordi, sorry to interrupt you. Somebody wrote me that I have something on my face, maybe chocolate. Do I have something on my face?
I don't think no. This is your mole. I think you're fine.
This, guys,
Yeah,
this
this is
is
your
the
mole.
mark
Yeah.
my parents gave me.
I don't see anything weird on your face. You look
You know, I'm
beautiful
a
as
girl.
always.
You know, you're saying something
Yeah,
very
I saw you
important,
doing like this.
but when I see something like you have something on your face, I'm totally distracted. You know. Yeah, sorry, but thank God you were saying something, you know, very established in acting. Like, what if we're not using
Yeah.
our past? This is another technique, Meisner, and all that. We're
Yeah.
talking about the imagination and the sympathy,
Exactly.
which is really, really important. No need
For,
to kill somebody to understand how it
It,
is to
it's
feel.
exactly it's pure empathy. I think one of the things that as actors that you work on, at least for me, the biggest tool is empathy. Like imagine this is happening to you, and then create the character from that. But just like if you're capable of feeling empathy, you're capable of being an actor. Yeah.
Hmm. Let us talk a little bit about the pandemic situation. How did it change your life, you know, your personal experience? What did you do? Maybe projects that you finalized during that period. And I know that in Spain it was really strict
It was
and
really strict, and we're still like in kind of lockdown. Like things are starting to reopen now and stuff, but there's still like like at 10 p.m. everybody has to be in their house. Like you're not allowed on the street, and like at 6 or something, like all bars and stuff are closed. So there's still like some strict guidelines. Little by little, it's been open. Like during last year, we spent 3 months. I spent 3 months in the apartment all by myself. I think that's one of the things
wow, three
yeah.
months just alone.
That was one of the biggest. It was a beautiful learning process when you think of it now, like, but there was points during it like that you like at the end, you can always use anything as an actor, but like, and that's probably what it took me. But like the fact of being alone, it made you like really reconnect with myself, which I used and I really liked, because at the beginning everybody was like, oh, let's Zoom and blah blah blah, and we're like, yeah, no, guys, like if we're gonna be in lockdown in my house, like I wanna try to change dynamics that I was doing, like trying before, like you were always like, I was always running this place, that dish, blah blah dinner. So it was nice to like stop and like reconsider habits that you had got, and like, was this habit healthy? Can we change and become like, why are you doing this? And rethink the reasons why you were doing this, and try to be more meaningful in the things you do. And I think that's what I learned from that's what has changed me, the pandemic, trying to be more meaningful.
Up, right?
I think so. Yeah, I think
so. And everyone else probably, right?
It's what I feel. It's one of those years. I don't know if it's for you also. At least for me, there's throughout your life, there's like that year that you did this thing, that year that, like, for me, it's I know that when I was 20, I went to study to the United States for a year, last year of college. That changed my life. I took a sabbatical when I was 30. It's one of the years that changes your life. And I feel this 2020, for good or worse, it changed your life. Like, you will always remember until you're old, but the time that you spent like 3 months alone in your house, and it's something that changes you and affects you. And I think it's trying to learn something out of it, not just beat yourself down to by the situation. Yeah.
Oh wow, yeah. So, but you, looking back here, you can say that you're thankful to this time. Am I correct?
I can.
It is what it is.
It is what it is. Like, obviously, I wish it hadn't happened, but while it was happening, it was like, you're not going to change what's happening in the world, so try to learn something for it and be thankful. And you can always, there's always not, and I have learned a lot of nice things through the pandemic. And of course, for me, that was the only thing that you could do. Like, this is happening, like, you're not going to change it, so try to learn out of it. Because if not, if you don't learn and you don't come changed out of this, then what was the point of all of this? So try to become a better person, a more meaningful person, and a more empathetic human being at the end.
So what was the most interesting activities you were doing during this time? Movies, sport?
I did a lot of sport. Like, I was training. I have a really nice terrace, so I was training every day, like outside. Like I got a TRX and some weights now, and I was, because it was like, I have to move, like, because I have a lot of energy, so I have to work out. So I developed a really nice routine. I was working out during the day, always. And I love cooking. I always go back to this. I watch a lot of movies and everything, but I love cooking. So I was cooking a lot and like trying to make like new recipes and new inventions. But it relaxes me. I'm one of those guys that I can cook for 2 hours and it relaxes me. So I was
cooking.
It was cooking, and it was nice cooking for myself.
You should say correctly cooking, because it sounded like cooking.
No, cooking. Sorry. Cooking. I like in the kitchen. I was preparing food. Yeah, sorry for that.
That's perfect. I loved it. I was like,
what was he doing? No.
Is it already
not that word that you said. No. Making food. When I was a kid, when I was 3 or 5, like, before wanting to be an actor, I wanted to be a cook. So and I've always loved making food and playing around with food. So yeah, I learned to do lasagna. I learned to do bread, a lot of things. Yeah.
So you could have easily opened your own blog about cooking. And
I think I have a friend who always tells me, like, you have to open your own blog, like your Instagram with all your recipes, and I was like, yeah, maybe I'll do, but it's like a lot of work. I always balance, like, do I want to commit to, because it's a lot of work writing a proper blog, and it's like, I have work enough with acting, like, I'm not sure I want to like commit full time to that. But yeah, it's always in the back of my mind, writing a blog or opening a little shop or something with my treats. Yeah.
Well, I can imagine you were cooking such great stuff, and then just looking at all this alone.
Yeah, I tried not to make like huge pots, but yeah, I remember like I did do like, this is so good. Okay, you have for 3 days now, because like obviously you cook and then you just freeze it like the next day. Yeah. But it's nice. But even though it's weird, it's nice to cook your own self for a really nice meal and just for yourself. Because sometimes I feel like if somebody's coming to your house, like, you'll cook really nicely, and then when you're alone, like, oh, this works. And it's a nice gift to your own, like, no, I'm going to make this nice meal for myself, and I'm going to eat it, and I'm going to treat myself to this. That's something really, really nice.
That's so great. You know, Jordi, you're unique because lots of people,
Oh.
but staying home for 3 months, they would probably really go depressed and
I, I
no
mean, I mean, I
sports,
mean, I'm, it,
drinking.
I'm making it look really nice. Like there was days that I was like in a hoodie in the couch, like this is sucks, like crying myself out. But it's
Mm.
you have to go through those emotions always, and there were bad days. I always describe this as a roller coaster, and it was a roller coaster, and there were really sucky days that I didn't want to do anything. But but that's while you're going through. But when you look back into it, you always remember the nice things, and because you allowed yourself to go through the bad moments, like you come out better, I think.
Very well said. Jordi, our time is actually almost over, and
Okay.
thank God we shouldn't have stopped it in a halfway, and we did the whole hour, and
Yeah,
we
I'm glad we
are
did
going
it.
to meet again. Yes, that was such an
Yeah,
interesting
definitely,
conversation.
definitely.
Absolutely.
I
Um,
loved it.
I have a tradition. I'm always asking my friends and colleagues and my guests for three advices that you could give to a professional actors and somebody who's just in the beginning. What would be your recommendation from your own experience?
To somebody that's starting in acting, you mean, or to just any kind of actor?
Even when you're starting or you're doing it, for everyone who's actually attached to this profession, from your own
I'd
experience.
say, ooh, that's nice. I'd say learn to love it and remember why you love it. Like, because work is work, and there's gonna be days that you feel like, oh, why am I doing this? And like, it's always nice to reconnect like the reason why you're acting, and remind yourself even on the bad days, because there will be bad days. Take it easy. It's a long career. It's not a sprint. So take your time. And if you miss one audition, it doesn't. If you screw up one audition, it's not the end of the world. You will like take it slow. Uh yeah, and enjoy the ride. Train as much as you can, and enjoy and be yourself and have fun. I don't know.
So perfect. That's actually the most, yes, those advices are the if you do this, then you're happy and you're doing you're
It's always nice to
success.
remind, because there are days that are really stressing, and being on set and being in an audition can be really stressful. But those days are the ones that you have to remind, like, I'm doing it for this, and today is gonna suck, but like and good. And then when the good days are there, it's like, yeah, this is why I do this job. This is why I like it.
It is really important to enjoy.
Yeah.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much, Jordi,
Thank you
and
for having me. It's
we'll
been a
we'll
pleasure. I've loved
see
it.
you soon. That was a great
Yeah,
interview. Thank you.
definitely
Mwah.
do. Love you. Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.